Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine War Frontline update for the 14th of December 2024. I'm just trying to see when I last did a Frontline update, and it was a good long time ago. Goodness me, it was on the 10th, and now we're on the 14th. So this is a 4-day update. Expect there to be some significant changes. Right, we are going to go to Kursk first, north of the Ukrainian border, around Sumy, where the North Koreans are apparently active. I just did a breaking news update on this, so I won't really labour the point. There were claims that they took, let's go to the map there, claims that they took Perpetua, North Korean Special Forces, a few days back, which I reported in a kind of rumour, a breaking news update. Then there are claims that they're active here, around, if we just zoom in a little bit, Kremennoye. There's a video that you can see of people walking. That's supposed to be North Koreans. That has been geolocated to Kremennoye, which you can see there. That's a geolocation. That's this area. But then, as you can see, there are claims that they're in other areas further to the south on that western front, in the northern part of that eastern front, and then, as mentioned, Prokrovsk further down to the south. So lots of claims. There are Ukrainian claims, Russian claims. You go and check out my breaking news video, but it does seem like the North Koreans are active here. As you can see, no change to the mapping in that Malaya Lochnia area to the west. There is some change to the north according to Turetsk maps, with this area being filled in. So these dark purple pins represent where Turetsk map's previous Russian defensive line was. He now has the Russians forward from there further to the south. Andrew Perpetua in the blue line thinks that there's a different interpretation of what's going on in that particular area. And of course, both mappers will have a grey zone before you get the Ukrainian defensive lines there. Now, as we go over to Prokrovsk, Andrew Perpetua now admitting that the Russians control at least half of Prokrovsk, and the rest might well be a grey zone. Turetsk maps reckoning that the Russians control vastly more area around there, including some recent moves further to the southwest towards Alexandria there. The Ukrainians not making any gains according to those two mappers in the Kursk region. No change to the two Kharkiv sectors, so we'll move on relatively quickly from there. And what's good news that I think this is very good news that in 4 days, relatively few gains on this eastern front. Just some fields in the southern area of the Pischane sector, where Turetsk maps has the Russians making some gains there. Now, I'm going to report this tomorrow in my hits and losses videos, just before we get on to Donetsk, because as you can see, a lot of activity going on there. Now, if you remember, there's this Anne of Kiev brigade that has been trained up in France with all French equipment and obviously French training. They are apparently in Donetsk. Now, some rumours out today, or claims out from French aid to Ukraine, that unit has been split up to supply different units along the I presume Donbass front. Now, on the one hand, you might think it is suboptimal. You've got a whole unit's been trained. You'd like to see them put into use as a collective. On the other hand, Ukraine have loads of needs right across the front line, and so you can imagine that different units would be like, oh, we need some APCs, or we need some infantry fighting vehicles, or we need some artillery, and it could well be that Anne of Kiev brigade has just been cut up to pieces and thrown in all the areas where they're needs must, and the Ukrainians are desperate along the front lines for troops on the ground. That much is obvious, and so I'd imagine that could be true, that the Ukrainians have just carved up the Anne of Kiev unit brigade and then throw them in all over the shop. And we'll talk about that tomorrow anyway. So we'll go to Chasiv Yar first, and good news is that the Ukrainians have pushed back in this area of Chasiv Yar. So just get our bearings right. So you've got the canal coming down there. The Russians have gradually taken more and more control of the main Chasiv Yar settlement as they have moved west of the canal, and then further down here they are west of the canal as well, as it comes down here. That is in the Stupochki direction, but the Ukrainians may be pushing back there. Some slight gains either side of the Ukrainian pushback. Grayskull has Ukrainians retaking some land. You can see there's this longish building there that they've retaken half of that. This is here, and that would fall in line with what Surat Maps is saying there. So the Russian lines pushed back further to there, north of these that road that comes along here, and that's somewhat what Grayskull has on their mapping there. Okay, so better news there from Chasiv. Andrew Perpetua has some land around Klishchivka under Russian control. Broadly speaking, I would have thought they have control of the land all the way to the canal there, which is what Surat Maps has. But Andrew Perpetua very cautious with his mapping, waiting for the requisite evidence. Right, in a Turetsk area, it's pretty heavy fighting. I've seen a building get blown up in Turetsk by the Ukrainians. It could well be that they have booby-trapped a lot of these buildings and wait till the Russians move in and then blow them up. But anyway, we have Russians making some fairly considerable gains over the last 4 days. I think these might be incorrect, so ignore those pins there. With Surat Maps, we have some gains in the center. Not quite sure where this goes from there. I don't know why that might be an errant pin or just a bit of weirdness there. And then the Russians gaining in the south of Turetsk on the way to New York, further to the south there, making some gains there, moving through, likely almost in control of the entirety of the south of Donetsk. And then we have, some small gains for the Russians as they move through Leonidivka. That's to the north of New York. New York is here. So, further gains after they had found it a little bit difficult, the Russians, to make gains in Turetsk, so the Ukrainians have pushed back and actually retaken some land on a few occasions. But now it seems that the Russians are pushing on there. And worryingly, they're pushing closer and closer to Prokrovsk. I wonder whether the main trench line in this kind of general area has been breached, or I'm not quite sure exactly where it goes around here. I know I was under the impression that the Russians have been kept to this broad position here, this line there, because that's where the main trench line sits with the Ukrainians. But the Russians have having a lot of joy coming up to the south of Prokrovsk, and I don't know whether it's the end of the trench line or whether they breached the trench line around here. I don't know the exact location of it, but they are having some success in pushing to the north and also pushing to the west. This is Novotroitska there, appears to be fully under their control. Andrew Perpetua agreeing that the Russians control a lot more land in this area than previously. A little bit of a rejig possibly for Surat Maps down in that area, but essentially, the Russians doing well there, and also filling in a lot of this area. There seem to be some errant pins today. I should have checked them out a little bit better. But you get the general gist of things, which is the Russians are filling in a lot of the gaps going south towards Kharkiv, where they are also pushing through Kharkiv and making slight gains in Stary Turney, just to the western edge of the Vovcha River reservoir that sits north of Kharkiv. They are, as mentioned, filling in some of these areas, pushing ever further westwards and getting fairly close to Andriivka, which is a fairly significant hub there. And then further south, there have been talks about Ukrainians being surrounded in Hanivka, and there could be some scare stories coming out of there. It seems that the Russians really have just, at least according to Surat Maps, taken all of that land up to Uspanivka, this river bed with a lot of towns on that lower ground going along the river course there. The Ukrainians have been pushed out entirely of that area, as I say, according to Surat Maps. Andrew Perpetua still has a different interpretation of what's going on. You can see that the Russian defensive line is much further back as far as he's concerned, but that could well follow on. Now, if we look at some of the, going back to the Prokrovsk direction, that's actually the 12th, a couple of days ago, no report saying Russians took control over a few places around there. Turetsk was one that I showed you. Moved towards Shevchenko. That's very close to Prokrovsk. There's only a small space towards Prokrovsk, which in the end is likely to fall. Ukrainian defense seems to have crumbled, so not looking good for the Prokrovsk area there. And then we've got Emil Castelhelmi talking about this area that has been surrounded. As I said, Hanivka could well have been surrounded. You might have seen there might have been some Ukrainians caught in that area and captured, not sure. Emil Castelhelmi says yesterday it seems that the Ukrainian defenders in Hanivka may be encircled as Russians push deeper into Uspenivka. So that is to say they pushed into here, thus surrounding the Ukrainians as they were trying to hold out there. Based on geolocated footage, both Russian and Ukrainian Telegram channels, a Ukrainian detachment of unknown size has been cut off from the rest of the troops. The situation in Hanivka has been difficult before already, as the enemy could threaten the thin supply lines from both sides. Despite the obvious issues, Ukrainians seemingly weren't given the order to retreat from the dangerous positions. Someone in the chain of command took unnecessary risks. Reportedly, efforts are underway to relieve the defenders, and the current situation is unclear. Succeeding in it depends a lot on how well the Russians are able to entrench themselves in Uspenivka. This kind of situation could have been avoided, and fixing it requires additional resources. If the situation is in reality as difficult as it seems, it wouldn't be the first time that Ukrainians experience problems because of stubbornly defending an unfavourable location. The situation could not have come as a surprise, and the higher-ups should have reacted sooner. We at Blackbird Group continue to monitor the situation. There's a map that broadly shows you. Oh no, that's a link to their full map. If we go back to their previous map, that's probably better. This gives you a good indication of what's going on there. And Ukraine is trying to potentially break through to those surrounded at Hanivka, but it depends how well the Russians are entrenched in Uspenivka, as mentioned by Castelhelmi. So that is the situation there. It's looking pretty hairy there. Maybe some slight gains or some rejigs for the in favour of the Ukrainians in a couple of these areas, but it's not particularly significant. Essentially, the Russians making some sizable gains along here, including south of Velika Novosilka. No change in the main area of Velika Novosilka, just south along the Mokry-Yali River here. As it meanders up through Makarivka, Russians making some gains in some fields around there on both sides of the river. No change anywhere else on the front line. Andrew Perpetua does have some changes around Robotyne, just north of there. The Russians, more in line with what Suret Maps had previously said, but not too serious since Suret Maps had already had that. But yeah, it's very worrying in this Donetsk, Prokrovsk, and southern Donetsk area, and Velika Novosilka. So that's your main area of concern, with possible encirclement of Ukrainian troops there. Chasiv looking all right. Turetsk starting to look a bit bad again, and fairly stable on that northeastern front. Stable in Kharkiv, and the Ukrainians still holding out in Kursk. Be interesting to see whether they are able to do that to January the 20th. That's understood to be the moment that, or the time that the Russians want that taken back by. That's your update. Things are hairy. Ukrainians on the back foot, definitely. They need people. They need lots of weapons. They are getting weapons, but they certainly need people. They've lost the Su-25 pilot that was apparently on a combat mission today in one of the hottest areas. I don't know exactly where, but the Ukrainians have lost the Su-25 and pilot, which is a real challenge. They don't want to lose that experience and those planes, of course. So not a great day of news, I guess. Well, remember, this is 4 days worth of movement on the front lines, but it is mainly in one direction at the moment. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.